let the Apache girl step into his tent to escape the chill, but faced a shocking surprise. The winter of 1874 settled heavily over the Arizona territory, wrapping the desert in a cold that surprised even the oldest settlers. During the day, the land still looked wide and golden, with endless stretches of sand and rock glowing under pale sunlight. But when night came, the temperature dropped quickly, and the open land turned silent and unforgiving. The wind moved across the plains with a lonely howl, carrying dust and dry leaves through the dark. Private Daniel Harper had been stationed near the edge of Apache land for almost a year. He was only 23, but the lines on his face made him look older. Life as a cavalry scout was not easy. He spent long hours riding through rough land, delivering messages, and watching the horizon for signs of movement. Some days were quiet. Others were filled with tension. The relationship between the soldiers and the Apache tribes had been strained for years. Fear and misunderstanding lived on both sides like shadows that refused to leave. That night, Daniel sat alone inside his canvas tent. A small iron stove burned in the corner, its weak orange glow fighting against the cold air that slipped through tiny gaps in the fabric walls. His gloves lay beside him, stiff from frost. His boots were dusty and worn from long rides. He had just finished writing a short letter to his mother back in Ohio, telling her that he was safe and that the winter here was not as bad as people said. As he folded the paper, he almost laughed at his own words. The cold here felt sharper than any winter he had known before. Outside, the camp had grown quiet. A few distant voices could be heard near the supply wagon, but most of the soldiers had already gone to sleep. The sky above was clear, filled with bright stars that seemed close enough to touch. Yet the beauty of the night did little to warm the air. Daniel leaned back on his cot and closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about home, about green fields, wooden fences, and the smell of fresh bread from his mother's kitchen. It felt like another world entirely. Here, everything seemed uncertain. Every sound in the dark could mean something. Every shadow might be more than just a shadow. Just as he began to drift toward sleep, he heard something. At first, it was so faint that he thought it was only the wind brushing against the tent. He opened his eyes and listened carefully. The sound came again, a soft crunch, like footsteps pressing into cold ground. He sat up slowly. Animals sometimes wandered near the camp drawn by leftover food, but this sound felt different, slow, careful. Daniel reached for the small lantern beside his cot and turned the flame slightly higher. The tent glowed brighter, casting long shapes on the canvas walls. His heart began to beat faster, though he wasn't sure why. He told himself it was nothing. Then came a gentle knock. It was not loud. It was not demanding. It was hesitant, almost unsure. Daniel froze. Soldiers did not knock like that. And no one from the camp would approach his tent so quietly at this hour. He stood up, pulling his coat tighter around him. For a moment he considered calling out to ask who was there, but something stopped him. Instead, he stepped closer to the entrance. Another soft knock followed, slightly weaker than the first. Daniel took a slow breath and untied the flap. The cold air rushed in immediately, biting at his face. He lifted the lantern higher and looked outside. Standing a few steps away was a young girl. She looked no older than 16 or 17. Her long dark hair was partially braided, though loose strands clung to her cheeks from the wind. She wore simple clothing that was far too thin for such a cold night. Her arms were wrapped around herself as if trying to hold in warmth. Snow dusted the edges of her moccasins. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Daniel recognized at once that she was Apache. He had seen members of the tribe from a distance before, riding across the hills or passing through the far edges of the territory, but he had never stood this close to one, especially not alone, and certainly not at night. Her eyes met his. They were not angry. They were not proud or challenging. They were tired. And beneath the tiredness there was fear. She spoke softly in her own language first, words he did not understand. Then, in broken English, she said, "Cold, please." Her voice was barely louder than the wind. Daniel's mind raced. This was not a simple situation. If another soldier saw her near the camp, questions would follow. Trouble could grow quickly from something like this. The tension between the fort and the Apache communities had been strong. Trust was fragile. One wrong move could lead to serious consequences. He glanced over his shoulder at the rows of tents behind him. The camp remained quiet. No one seemed to have noticed. He looked back at the girl. Her hands were trembling. For a moment, he thought about his orders, about loyalty, about the warnings he had heard since arriving in the territory. Be careful. Do not trust too easily. Stay alert. But as he stood there, feeling the same freezing wind on his own face, Those warnings felt distant. What he saw in front of him was not a threat. It was a human being standing in the cold. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said quietly. The girl hesitated for a second, as if unsure whether to believe him. Then she moved forward, ducking carefully into the tent. The warmth from the stove brushed against her immediately, though it was faint. Daniel closed the flap quickly, shutting out the wind. Inside the small space, the silence felt heavier. The lantern light revealed how pale her face looked from the cold. She kept her distance from him, standing near the entrance, as though ready to leave at any moment. Daniel reached for the thick wool blanket on his cot and held it out to her. "Here," he said gently. She looked at the blanket, then at him. Slowly, she accepted it and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her fingers clutched the fabric tightly, as if afraid it might disappear. He poured a small cup of water from his canteen and offered it to her. She drank carefully, her eyes never fully leaving his face. For the first time, he noticed how young she truly seemed. Whatever strength she carried, she was still just a girl far from comfort and safety. "What is your name?" he asked after a moment. She paused, as though deciding whether to answer. Finally, she said softly, "A pony." "Daniel." She repeated his name slowly, testing the sound of it. Outside, the wind continued its lonely song across the desert. Inside the tent, two strangers sat in fragile silence, separated by history and fear, yet connected by something simple and powerful, the need for warmth. Daniel did not know why she had come. He did not know what waited beyond this night. But as he watched her sit closer to the stove, her shaking slowly easing, he felt a strange sense that this moment was important. The desert had a way of bringing unexpected encounters. The small tent felt even smaller now that someone else was inside it. The sound of the wind outside continued to push against the canvas walls, making them shake softly. The lantern light moved with every breeze, causing shadows to stretch and bend across the fabric. Daniel sat on the edge of his cot, trying to act calm, though his thoughts were moving quickly. A pony remained close to the stove. The thick wool blanket covered her shoulders, but her fingers still held it tightly, as if she feared someone might take it away. The warmth was slowly returning to her face. The pale look caused by the cold began to fade, replaced by a natural bronze tone. She looked around carefully, her eyes moving from one corner of the tent to the other. Daniel noticed how observant she was. She did not stare in a careless way. She studied things. The folded uniform hanging from a hook, the saddlebag near the entrance, the rifle resting against the wooden crate that served as a table, the rolled maps tied with string. He cleared his throat gently. "You are alone?" he asked. "Ah." She hesitated before answering. "Yes." Her English was simple, and she spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. Daniel understood that she likely knew more than she showed. Sometimes people reveal only what they must. "You get lost?" he asked. She nodded at first. Then she paused. "Separated," she corrected softly. That single word carried more weight than the others. It suggested movement. A group. A journey interrupted. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "From your family?" A pony looked at the floor for a moment. The lantern light reflected in her dark eyes. "From my people," she replied. The wind outside grew stronger for a moment, making the tent snap loudly. Daniel stood up quickly to secure one of the ropes. When he returned to his seat, he noticed that a pony had shifted slightly closer to the stove. He reached into a small cloth bag and took out a piece of dried meat and a bit of hard bread. He placed them carefully on the crate between them. "Eat," he said gently. She looked surprised at the offer, but accepted it quietly. She ate slowly, not like someone who was starving, but like someone who had learned to make food last. Daniel watched her hands. They were steady now. Strong hands, not delicate. Hands used to work and travel. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel as sharp as before, but it was still filled with unspoken thoughts. Daniel had been told many stories about the Apache. Some described them as fierce and proud. Others spoke of raids and fear. But sitting across from a pony, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and eating simple food, those stories seemed far away. She did not look like a story. She looked real. Still, something about her presence felt unusual. Most people who sought shelter would speak more. They would explain their situation quickly. They would ask questions or show visible relief. A pony, however, remained calm, watchful. Her eyes moved again, this time toward the rolled maps on the crate. Daniel noticed. "They're just maps," he said casually. She looked at him and gave a small nod, but her gaze lingered for a second longer than necessary. "Your camp big?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised him. He answered carefully, "Not too big." "How many soldiers?" she continued. Daniel paused. Her voice was still soft, but the questions felt more direct now. "Why you ask?" he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. She looked down at the piece of bread in her hand. Just asking," she replied. Daniel studied her face. There was no smile, no nervous laughter, just quiet focus. He remembered the tension that had been growing in the territory. Groups, rumors of shifting camps, both sides watching each other from a distance. It was a time when small misunderstandings could turn into large problems. He leaned back slightly. "Camp is same as always," he said, giving no details. Pony nodded again. She did not push further. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Not as simple. More layered. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "You from far?" "Yes," Daniel answered. "Ohio." She repeated the word slowly. "Oh." "It is green there," he said without thinking. "Lots of trees. Rivers. Not like this." He gestured toward the desert outside. She listened carefully, as if trying to picture it. "No mountains?" she asked. "Some hills," he replied, "but not like here." For the first time, a faint expression of curiosity crossed her face. "Why come here?" she asked. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Army sent me." "That all?" she asked quietly. He thought about that. Was that truly all? He had joined because he wanted adventure, because he believed in serving his country, because he thought the world was simple, right and wrong, clear lines between sides. Now, sitting in a small tent with someone he had been taught to see as the enemy, those lines felt less clear. "I thought it was right," he finally said. A pony looked at him carefully when he said that, as if weighing the meaning. Outside, the wind slowly began to calm. The night felt deeper, heavier. Daniel noticed that a pony's eyes drifted once more toward the maps. This time, she spoke differently. "You ride tomorrow?" she asked. The question was direct. He hesitated. "Maybe... where?" The word was soft, but it landed firmly between them. Daniel felt the tension fully now. Her questions were not random. They were leading somewhere. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Why do you need to know?" he asked calmly. For a long moment she did not answer. Then she lifted her head and met his gaze fully. There was no fear in her eyes now. "Only seriousness. My people move," she said carefully. "Cold season. Families travel. If soldiers ride clothes, trouble." The honesty in her voice surprised him. She had not denied her interest. She had not pretended anymore. "You came here for information?" he asked quietly. She did not answer right away. Instead, she asked something unexpected. "If your family in danger, you ask questions too?" The words struck him harder than he expected. He imagined his mother, his younger sister, forced to leave home in winter. He imagined strangers riding near them without warning. "Yes," he admitted slowly, "I would." A pony nodded once, as if that settled something inside her. The lantern flickered, and for a second the tent grew dim before the flame steadied again. Daniel realized that this night was no longer just about offering shelter. It was about trust, about choices, about understanding what kind of man he wanted to be. He looked at the maps again, then back at her. "You studied them earlier," he said. She blinked slightly, surprised that he had noticed. "I look only," she replied. "Why not take?" he asked. Her answer came quickly. "Not thief." Daniel felt a small wave of respect. The air between them felt charged now, not with hostility, but with truth. They were no longer pretending this was only about the cold. The tent felt warmer, yet the situation felt more serious. A pony shifted slightly, sitting straighter. "I not want fight," she said quietly. "No one want." Her words hung in the air. Outside, the stars continued to shine over the frozen desert. The camp remained unaware of the quiet conversation happening inside one small tent. Two young people from different worlds sat across from each other, both carrying responsibility greater than their years. Daniel did not yet know how the night would end. But he understood one thing clearly now. A pony had not come by accident. The night grew deeper, and the cold outside settled like a heavy blanket over the land. Inside the tent, the small stove continued to glow, giving off just enough warmth to make the air bearable. The lantern flame had grown lower, and the shadows along the canvas walls seemed longer and softer. For a while, neither Daniel nor a pony spoke. Daniel finally lay back on his cot, though he did not fully relax. He placed one arm under his head and kept his boots on. It was a habit he had developed during his time as a scout. One never truly slept deeply in uncertain times. He closed his eyes, but his mind remained alert. Across from him, a pony sat quietly near the stove, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her face looked calmer now. The trembling had stopped completely. She appeared thoughtful, staring into the faint orange glow of the fire as if it held answers. The silence between them felt fragile. After some time, Daniel's breathing slowed. The steady rhythm of the wind outside blended with the quiet crackle of the stove. The long day of riding and the late hour began to pull him towards sleep, despite his effort to stay aware. A pony waited. She watched him carefully, making sure his eyes remained closed. She listened to the sound of his breathing. Only when she was certain that he had drifted into a light sleep did she slowly shift her position. The movement was almost silent. She stood carefully, making sure the blanket did not brush against the crate too loudly. Her eyes adjusted to the dim lantern light. Step by step, she moved toward the small wooden crate that served as Daniel's desk. The rolled maps rested there, tied neatly with string. For a moment, she simply stared at them. Her face changed slightly. Softness from earlier was gone. Now her expression showed focus and responsibility. Whatever she was about to do, she did not take lightly. She gently reached for one of the maps and untied the string. The paper made a faint sound as it opened. She paused immediately and glanced toward Daniel. He did not move. Slowly, she spread the map flat on the crate and leaned closer to the lantern. The drawn lines and markings were difficult to read at first. She traced the shapes of rivers and hills with her eyes. She searched for familiar landmarks. A mountain ridge, a dry creek bed, a narrow pass between two rocky hills. Her breathing grew slightly faster. Then she heard it. Daniel opened his eyes. At first, he did not move. He simply watched her from the cot. The sight of her standing over the map in the middle of the night made his heart pound once, hard and sudden. He sat up slowly. The movement caused a soft creak in the cot. The pony turned quickly. For a brief moment, they froze, staring at each other across the small space. The lantern light flickered between them. Daniel's first feeling was not anger. It was surprise. "You said you only look," he said quietly. A pony did not step back. She did not hide the map. Instead, she held his gaze steadily. "I look," she answered. "You search," he corrected. There was no harshness in his voice, only truth. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted them again. "Yes," she admitted. Daniel stood up slowly from the cot. He did not reach for his rifle. He did not raise his voice, but the tension in the air became heavier. "Why?" he asked. For a second, she seemed unsure whether to answer. Then she spoke with more confidence than before. "My father," she said clearly. "He is chief." The words settled in the small tent like falling stones. Daniel blinked, trying to process what she had just said. "Chief?" he repeated. She nodded once. "My people move for winter," she continued. "We hear soldiers plan to ride near our camps. We fear trouble. I need to see." Her English sounded stronger now, more steady. It was clear she understood more than she had shown earlier. Daniel felt a mixture of emotions rise inside him. He felt surprised that she had hidden this from him. He felt unsettled knowing that the daughter of a chief had been standing in his tent. But most of all, he felt the weight of responsibility. "You came here on purpose," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. The honesty in her voice made it difficult to stay angry. Daniel walked closer to the crate. He looked down at the map she had opened. His eyes followed the lines marking the planned patrol route. The path cut across an area not far from known Apache winter grounds. He had not thought deeply about it before. To him, it had been just another assignment. Ride, observe, report. But to her, those lines meant something very different. "You could have taken it," he said quietly. "You could have run. That would bring more soldiers," she said. More anger. He studied her face carefully. There was no sign of dishonesty, no sign of pride in what she had done. Only concern. "You trust me enough to tell the truth now?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You let me in," she said. "You give food, warmth. I cannot lie after that." Her words surprised him more than her confession. The tension inside him softened slightly. Still, he felt conflicted. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. "If someone finds you here, perhaps I don't know." "I know. And if I tell my captain?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she asked quietly, "Will you?" Daniel looked at the map again, then at her. then at the rifle leaning in the corner. He realized that this moment stood at a crossroads. "You said you do not want fight," he reminded her. "I do not," she said firmly. "But I must protect my people." Her voice did not shake this time. Daniel felt a strange respect growing inside him. She was young, yet she carried herself with the seriousness of someone older. She had walked into a military camp alone. That required courage. He stepped back slightly and folded his arms. "If I help you," he said carefully, "I risk my place here." "If you do not," she replied, "my people risk their safety." Silence returned. The wind outside had grown softer. The night seemed to hold its breath. Daniel thought about his own family again. He imagined strangers riding near their home without warning. He imagined fear spreading through his town. He looked at Aponi once more. "You should have told me from the start," he said quietly. "I needed to know if you are kind," she answered. Her response caught him off guard. "And now?" he asked. She hesitated. "I think you are." The words felt simple, but they carried weight. Daniel walked back toward his cot and sat down. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to think clearly. He had always believed that loyalty meant following orders without question. But tonight, things felt more complicated. "You understand?" he said slowly. "I cannot change what is planned." She nodded. "I know. But I can tell you something," he continued. Her eyes lifted quickly. He hesitated for a final moment. Then he spoke. "The patrol rides in 2 days," he said. "They follow this route." He pointed to a line on the map. "They believe your camps are farther west." Aponi leaned closer, studying the path carefully. She memorized every curve, every landmark. "They will reach here by late afternoon," he added. She looked up at him, and for the first time that night, real relief appeared on her face. "You give us time," she whispered. "I give you truth," he corrected gently. She nodded, understanding. After a few seconds, she carefully rolled the map back into place and tied the string neatly, exactly as she had found it. "I will leave before light," she said. Daniel nodded. They stood in silence once more, but this time the feeling between them had changed. It was no longer built on suspicion. It was built on something fragile but real. Trust. The lantern flame flickered again, casting soft light across their faces. Neither of them fully understood how important this night would become. But they both knew one thing. Nothing would be the same after this. The hours before sunrise always felt the coldest. The small stove inside Daniel's tent had burned low, and only a faint red glow remained beneath the ashes. The lantern had been turned down to save oil, leaving the space dim and quiet. Outside, the desert lay still under a pale sky that had not yet decided to become morning. Daniel had not slept again. After telling Aponi about the patrol route, he lay back on his cot, but his mind would not rest. Every thought led to another question. Had he done the right thing? Had he crossed a line that could not be uncrossed? Or had he simply chosen to act as a human being instead of a soldier? Across from him, Aponi sat quietly with the blanket around her shoulders. She did not try to study the maps again. She did not ask more questions. She seemed to understand that she had already received more than she expected. When the first faint gray light began to touch the canvas walls, she stood. "It is time," she said softly. Daniel sat up immediately. He could hear faint sounds from the camp outside, someone coughing, a horse shifting its weight, the creak of leather straps. Soon the fort would fully wake. "You should leave from the backside," he said, standing and pulling on his gloves. "Less chance someone sees." She nodded. For a moment they simply looked at each other in the early light. The tension from the night had changed into something quieter, something thoughtful. You are sure about the route?" she asked one last time. "Yes," he answered. 2 days. Afternoon." She repeated it under her breath, as if locking the words into memory. Daniel moved to untie the tent flap, but before he opened it, he turned back to her. "If anyone asks," he said carefully, "you were never here." She gave a small, understanding nod. "And if anyone from your people asks," he added, "tell them not all soldiers wish for trouble." "I will tell them what I saw," she replied. He lifted the flap slightly. The air that rushed in was sharp and icy, but the sky showed hints of light near the horizon. The world looked quiet, almost peaceful, as if it had forgotten the tension that lived beneath it. Aponi stepped toward the opening. Just before she ducked out, she paused. "You had a choice," she said quietly. "You chose kindness." So he simply nodded. Then she was gone. He lowered the flap and stood still for several seconds, listening. He heard nothing unusual. No raised voices. No alarm. Just the normal sounds of a camp waking to another cold morning. Daniel let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. The day moved forward as usual, but everything felt different to him. He joined the other soldiers near the supply wagon for breakfast. They spoke about routine matters, horses needing new shoes, extra blankets arriving from the east, rumors about weather changing. No one mentioned seeing anyone near the tents during the night. Daniel kept his face calm. He forced himself to act normal, but inside, his thoughts were heavy. Later that morning, Captain Reeves gathered a group of scouts, including Daniel. "We ride the day after tomorrow," the captain said, pointing at a map similar to the one in Daniel's tent. "We will follow this route. Keep your eyes sharp." There have been movements reported. Daniel's eyes traced the same line he had shown a pony. He felt the weight of what he had done press against his chest. "Yes, sir," he replied, along with the others. The next day passed slowly. Daniel tried to focus on simple tasks, checking his saddle, cleaning his boots, preparing supplies. But every time he looked toward the distant hills, he wondered where Aponi was now. Had she reached her people safely? Had she delivered the warning? He imagined her walking quickly across the cold land, guided by stars in memory. He imagined her reaching a hidden winter camp tucked between hills, speaking urgently to her father. He hoped he had not placed her in danger by sharing the information. On the morning of the patrol, the air felt unusually still. The sky was clear, and frost covered the ground like a thin white sheet. Daniel mounted his horse with the other scouts. The sound of hooves against frozen earth echoed sharply as they began to ride. Captain Reeves led the group at a steady pace. The desert stretched wide before them. The mountains in the distance looked calm and silent. As they rode, Daniel's mind battled itself. One part of him feared that the camps would still be there, that nothing had changed, that his choice had meant nothing. Another part feared something else, that someone might discover he had shared information. But deeper than both fears was a quiet hope. They reached the first marked point by midday. It was a dry creek bed surrounded by tall rocks. According to reports, Apache families had been seen moving near this area weeks earlier. The soldiers spread out slightly, scanning the land. Daniel's eyes searched carefully. There were signs that people had been there. Faint tracks in the dirt, ashes from old fires, pieces of wood stacked neatly, but everything looked abandoned. No tents. No horses. Captain Reeves frowned. "Keep moving," he ordered. They rode farther along the route. At the second location, near a narrow mountain pass, they found similar signs. Clear evidence that a camp had existed, but it was empty now. Carefully packed. Not rushed, not chaotic. Daniel felt something shift inside him. They had left in time. As the patrol continued through the afternoon, the same pattern repeated. Signs of life, but no people. No conflict. No tension waiting to explode. By late afternoon, Captain Reeves finally signaled for the group to halt. "It seems they moved on," he said with mild frustration. Strange timing. One of the other soldiers shrugged. "Maybe they heard we were riding out." Daniel kept his expression neutral. Inside, relief washed over him quietly. The patrol returned to the fort before sunset. The day had passed without any confrontation. No raised weapons. No panic. Just empty land and fading tracks. That night, as Daniel sat alone in his tent again, the events replayed in his mind. He realized how small the moment inside his tent had seemed at the time. Just two young people speaking quietly in the dark. But that small moment had created space. Space for families to move safely. Space for soldiers to return without tension. Space for something different to grow. Still, doubt remained. Had he betrayed his duty? Or had he honored something deeper? He remembered Aponi's words, "You chose kindness." He did not see himself as brave. He had simply listened to his conscience. The next few days passed without major events. The fort continued its routines. Supplies were counted, horses were trained, letters were written. Then, one evening near dusk, something unexpected happened. A white cloth was spotted tied to a tree not far from the outer edge of the fort. It moved gently in the breeze, visible from a distance. The symbol was clear. It meant a peaceful approach. Soldiers gathered quickly, watching from behind fences and wagons. Captain Reeves stepped forward cautiously. From the far side of the open land, a small group approached slowly. Among them walked a tall man with steady steps and calm posture. His presence carried quiet authority, and, walking slightly behind him, Daniel's heart skipped, was Aponi. She looked different now, stronger, certain. The group stopped at a respectful distance. Captain Reeves signaled for calm. The tall man stepped forward and spoke firmly but peacefully. Though his words were translated carefully by someone who understood both languages, His message was clear. He wished to speak about understanding, about preventing unnecessary trouble, about finding ways to avoid harm during the winter months. Daniel stood among the soldiers, silent and steady. He did not step forward. He did not draw attention to himself. But when Aponi's eyes briefly met his across the distance, there was recognition. In that moment, Daniel understood something important. He had faced a choice between strict obedience and thoughtful judgment. He had chosen to see the person in front of him rather than the fear behind the uniform or the title. And that choice had opened a door, not to grand celebration, not to immediate friendship, but to possibility. Sometimes the strongest decisions are not loud. Sometimes they happen quietly inside a small tent before dawn, and sometimes those quiet decisions echo farther than anyone expects.